It was explosive. And, with all the stuff going on in Florida, all the stuff going on in North Carolina, I couldn't think of a better guy to have him on. And, birthday boy, Mark Steves, like, can we do emergency episode? I'm like, let's fucking go. His website is theclimateviewer.com. Please welcome back one of my favorites, Jim Lee. How are you, brother?
Pimping. And also for everybody who's going to be interested in this topic, check out weathermodificationhistory.com. That's my other website. It has 150 years of weather modification history, including over 800 newspaper articles that start at 1889 to present. It is the most
Weathermodification.com. Okay,
weathermodificationhistory.com.
here we go.
Longest URL ever, I know. But if you want to find all my stuff, connect.climateviewer.com. Connect.climateviewer.com has a link to all of my websites and all my socials. That's the
So hold
easiest way
on,
to
it's
do it.
Connect. It's
Yeah.
Connect. Okay, so it's
Dot,
not Climate Viewer, it's Connect Climate Viewer.
yeah. Connect.climateviewer.com. And that brings up all of my websites. I made my own link tree because Linktree was giving me some half-ass reason why they
Okay.
banned my account. So I made my own.
Respect. All right. So all of those links are in the description below. Jim, for those who may not be familiar with you've been on the show a couple times. Every time it's just amazing. I leave our conversations knowing so much more. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and where our listeners can find you? Well, obviously you did your website, but a little bit about yourself, then we'll get into everything.
Yeah. Been a hacker and martial artist since I was 12 years old. I'm 48 years old. Um, I'm anti-fear porn. I take my job very seriously. In fact, I carry the sword of truth everywhere I go. I keep it on my desk as a daily reminder that this cuts through bullshit better than anything. Um, I had my daughter when I was in 2009, and up to that point, I was just a professional video game player, video game designer, graphics designer, and I decided I needed to leave anonymous. You may see that over my shoulder here.
Yeah.
That I had to get out of the hacker game, put my name, face, address on my website, and do something about some of the things I'd learned. And geoengineering being the top of my list. I don't want my daughters to grow up in a world where people control the weather. So this became my number one topic I focus on. I talk about many things from pollution, privacy, propaganda to directed energy weapons, MK Ultra, and everything in between, especially, mass surveillance, spying, election rigging, how they're hacked, how all of the voting machines we're about to use can be hacked. But being born in the year of the dragon, just like Topher Gardner, turns out in Chinese mythology that dragons control the weather, so everything happens for a
That's
reason.
crazy.
Yeah, it isn't it. But so this has always been a topic of fascination for me, and the more I dig, the more I learn, the more questions I have. So I recently put up on my YouTube channel, like got a new overlay made by my friend Dominic Moran, who's a graphics artist, and he put Jim Lee, investigative researcher up there, and I said, how about put not an expert above my name? Because at the end of the day, I heard this new saying, this quote. I was looking for a different quote, but this one hit me, in the gut. It resonated. Always a student, sometimes a teacher, never an expert. I don't have it all figured out, and anybody that claims that they do, they're
That's a great
wrong.
saying.
Yeah. So if you live with that mindset and you're willing to be open to the possibility that you are wrong, and you're honest with your audience, then you gain respect. And I have gained that respect over the last 20 years of activism, and I will keep to it every which way. But today I get to put my tinfoil hat on, which I don't get to do very rarely. And let's dig into it, man. What you got questions, I got answers.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. I really love everything that you said right there. Again, never what was it?
Always a student,
Always a
never,
student,
sometimes a teacher,
teacher,
never
never.
an expert.
Okay,
Never.
perfect.
Yeah.
That is my life and that is this show. I love it. For whatever people think about Twitter, and I could sit here forever and talk about Elon Musk and all the things I don't like about him, and that he's doing. I do like Twitter. I think sometimes I'm stuck in an algorithm that is just feeding me what I already know, so that I stay in that lane, and I understand that as well. But I do believe there's a lot of conversations going on Twitter right now that,
The spaces are amazing. I've been
yeah,
addicted. I have literally, I've been working on a house for my mother-in-law to move into to take care of her. And so I took 2 months off from content creation. And every single day while I'm at work, I'm in egg spaces all day long, arguing with people that don't believe the same thing as me. It is the single greatest change in the internet I've seen in the past 20 years.
I couldn't agree more. And yes, I understand what he represents to a lot of the black pill people. So I'm not negating any of that. But all this information coming out, depending on what side you are, um, a lot. We got the Smith-Mundt Act that just has flooded
Yep.
a lot of the stuff with just misinformation from the people that say they want to pass laws to fight misinformation. And one of the things that are going on is that my very intelligent friends have visceral reactions. I watch them all the time. I don't engage my progressive friends in political talk because I would rather be friends, and I nothing I say to them is going
I
to
don't
change
blame you.
them, right? So I observe it from far away, them just saying ridiculous stuff about how they find weather manipulation laughable. And it's just shocking to me because how much stuff do you have to go through in the last 20 years to realize anything and all things are possible? And when you really study what is going on, like you have to believe in coincidence so much. And it's what Greg Carlwood said, the deviation from the norm. When you just see deviations from the norm, you really have to go, is there an invisible hand at work? And so that's why I'm glad you're here, because you're the perfect person to talk to about
Well,
what's going on.
let's start with a huge deviation from the norm. Something that nobody talks about, and and I just went to go pull it up because I was going to screen share with you. And of course, they've memory hold all of this, which really tells you something. If it's available on Google, they want you to know it. But if it's been memory hold, there's some there.
Right.
And it just so happens that for those who don't know who are watching this, archive.org was just hacked, all email addresses, leaked, and they were DDoSed, so they were, direct distributed denial of service. I went to go unmemory hole it, and archive.org is still down as we're speaking right now. But this is from cnsnews.com, and the article is titled Major U.S. Hurricane Drought Ends After Record 4,323 Days. There was a 10-year hurricane drought from 2005. I actually have the image up here on the screen till roughly 2017. What's interesting about those numbers is that in 2008, the Department of Homeland Security had a hurricane modification workshop. Interesting. So,
Really?
yes, and I can bring it. If you want me to screen share any of this stuff,
I'm trying to figure out how to on Zoom to give you the right to start screen share. Can I do that? Is that how you do it?
no,
No.
it's like it's a preferences thing. Like you gotta enable where I can do it, but I don't have to
Well,
bring
here
it
we
up.
go. Yes, here we
If
go.
you can
Found
figure it
it.
out, I
Found
can
it.
bring it
Found
up.
it. Found it. There we go.
All right, so yeah, let me just give me 1 second. I'll bring it up, weather mod history, and it's right there on the front page. I can just click right on it and here, and let me just bring this over here. I'll pull this up to full screen and I'll screen share and screen number 3 and share. And let me know. You can see that, right?
Yes, we can see it. Yep.
This is from weathermodificationhistory.com, and I have what's called an interactive timeline. So if you go to that, you can actually scroll through the entire history of weather control, and you can even sort it by geoengineering, weather modification, and space weather modification. If you want to really drill down, you can hit show tags, and you can go to things like hurricane modification. And this is every single hurricane modification experiment to date. Or you can click something fun like weather warfare.
That's
Um,
crazy, dude.
yeah, I love programming. I'm a graphics artist. I make all my own websites and I have too much fun doing all this. So this is a fun way to view all of this stuff. And if that's not enough for you, if you get bored with that and you've done your homework, then you can come over to the newspaper vault and you can scroll through. These were created by my friend Dominic Marama. Um, Over 850 newspapers with crazy things in them, like producing rain with X-rays. I mean,
That's from 1919.
yes. I mean,
Wow.
and dude, I'm not even gonna make there's 1921. This literally says okay, that's 18 founded 1872. Spraying electrified sand from a biplane to make it rain. So when you go through the history of this, is rain making riddles solved? 1923. There is no doubt that the only conspiracy about the history of weather modification is that you weren't told about it. And you can
Yeah.
learn all that's why I created this freaking insane website. So to any of your progressive friends that you were previously talking about, not only is this um TDS. This is like the vaccine for TDS.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
It
Yeah.
literally is the number one troll killer on the internet. I've received thousands of emails from people who had this personal troll, and I said go to weathermodificationhistory.com, link this to them, and you can just flip through the major highlights right here at the front. From Lyndon Johnson talking about controlling the weather to Operation Popeye, everything in between, weather warfare over Vietnam, the CIA trying to destroy Cuba with weather warfare, the weather warfare ban of 1978. This is not a conspiracy. But I want to focus on two things on this timeline. So on the weather modification, the Department of Homeland Security workshop, and you can see that here. This was February 6th through 7th in 2008. And it was hosted by NOAA, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Earth Systems Research Lab. And these are the scientists that showed up for it. So this is not made up at all. But here they give a good example of how you would actually steer a hurricane.
Holy shit. How to halt a hurricane. And for those who are listening, it's a graphic.
Yeah, I'll read it out.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
they show like a C-130J Super Hercules plane flying above a hurricane. Step one: fleet of transport flying aircraft flying at 50,000 feet drop soot or carbon black dust in the path of and at targeted areas of the hurricane. Step two: soot or carbon black dust is warmed by the sun, heating the cool air around it at the very top of the hurricane. This reduces the flow of air within the hurricane and slows it down. Step three: depending on when and where the soot is dropped, the now weakened hurricane will change course. This goes back now at this Department of Homeland Security Hurricane Modification Workshop. Uh, Dr. Mosh Alamaro from MIT University, he actually was talking about doing something called carbon black aerosol.
Yes, dude.
Yeah, carbon
Yes.
black aerosol, and it also turns out that Bill Gates, and you can see in this graphic here, he created a patent in 2009. It was actually filed 2008, January 3rd, before the DHS Hurricane Modification Workshop, to basically say, hey, oil field in Texas, there's a hurricane coming your way. We will take payment receive at least one payment method from at least one interested party, receive a request from interested party to provide storm protection. So,
Holy shit.
and the people that are on this are Bill Gates, Ken Caldera, a geoengineer, John Latham, Stephen Salter, two geoengineers that invented the Silver Lining Project. Silverlining.ngo is the website, or marine cloud brightening. So when you realize, and it's also Lowell Wood Jr. and Roderick Hyde, who are the inventors of geoengineering. So when you have this list of very prominent people all on a patent to steer hurricanes, it gets a lot creepier when you realize that.
That is insane, dude. Holy shit.
Yeah, so when you for those, like I say, for those who are saying this is all just made up, there's no there. Um, I'll argue this with you. In fact, and I'm going to share this one more time. Let me pull this up because this is kind of prominent. Let me just bring the Photoshop over here. I was gonna save this, but I didn't get time. Um, let's just bring it down just a hair. So this is the hurricane drought that occurred.
What are we
And
looking at here? It is a graph of what is this graph?
this is all the hurricanes that made landfall from 2005 through 2017. And over here on the side, I drew a little line between Katrina and Harvey. Now, why did I do that? Because then the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were battling it out. That is the 10-year or 4,232 day hurricane drought they're talking about. There's a bunch of ones, twos. These are ones. Literally, look at these pink lines. In 2006, 2009, 2010, 2013, and 2015, no hurricanes made landfall. Zero, zilch, nada, niente, nine. So when you think about that, and we talk about coincidences, this is a coincidence you cannot ignore. Now, here's my tinfoil hat. If you've got a hurricane modification workshop and you've got the history of hurricane modification going back to Project Cirrus in 1947, which was literally October of 1947. So in 2017, that was the 70th anniversary of the first hurricane modification work project. Cloud seeding was invented in 1946 in November. Less than 11 months later, they were trying to steer a hurricane. Then from 1960s through the 70s, they had Project Storm Fury. I could bring all this up, but let's flow with it. It's all in the timeline. So if you want to go look it up, it's there already. I've already done the work for you along with the references. Go slay all of your, hater friends who don't believe this is real. You will be able to destroy them with everything. You don't even have to tell them where you got it from. I don't care. It's not about me. This is about, the truth. Project Storm Fury was a project run by NOAA for the better part of 20 years attempting to steer hurricanes. From 63 through 82, I want to say. And during that, the CIA actually had a project that was associated with Project Storm Fury to steer hurricanes into Castro's Cuba.
Yeah,
You
dude.
cannot make this stuff up. In fact, I wasn't even aware of this till June of this year, because this has never been admitted publicly. And a dude named David Reed, he wrote about us. Literally the longest article ever written. Come on, bag. Thing's being stupid. Gonna rip my own bag trying to open it right now. Wants to be a dumbass. You know what? It's not worth it.
It's all good.
I can bring it up on my screen faster than I can get it out of that bag, apparently. This gentleman wrote about us in the United States Air Force historical magazine, and first of all, I was flattered. Like I'm super flattered. But what was even cooler about it was that, where's that share screen button at? You got to see this. You're not even going to up till now. Okay. So here we go. This is the Journal of the Air Force Historical Foundation from June 2024, volume 71, number 2. And if you scroll down, I put this basically just, ripped out everything but this. And it's Perception versus Reality, the True History of Weaponized Weather and Operation Popeye in Southeast Asia. And if I just quickly do this and I hit Control F and I type in Cuba, under this secret effort, hurricanes were intensified and steered towards Cuba to wrought destruction on the island nation from the power of these tropical giants.
Dude,
while under Project Storm Fury. This has never been made public till June of 2024. So this is news to me. So I say, always a student, sometimes a teacher, never an expert, because
yeah, dude, that's
just like that, June of this year, dude drops this in my lap, and I'm like, you got to be freaking kidding me. The Navy's China Lake Secret Hurricane Program seeded dozens of hurricanes between 1961 and 1966 alone, steering hurricanes into Cuba. Now, this is not some, conspiracy rag. This is David Reed writing the longest article in the history of the Journal of the Air Force Historical Foundation magazine. So when you consider that, bro, I'm not making this stuff up. Like, literally, if they were able to do that in the 1960s, for you to say it's not happening today, you're freaking crazy. We had a hurricane drought for 10 years. And it just so happened during those 10 years, 8 of the, at least 7 of those years were under President Barack Obama. What did Barack Obama do? He signed the Paris Climate Accord. And what was the thing that Trump did the first day he was in office? He canceled the Paris Climate Accord. So what happened after that?
Yeah.
You can't make this stuff up. I mean, there's no takebacks. We have the freaking receipts. What happened after that was in 2017, Hurricane Harvey, Irma, and Nate hit the U.S., ending that freaking 10-year drought.
Holy shit.
So riddle me this to all you people out there who are haters and say, this isn't true. There were hurricanes in between. Yeah, they were ones and twosies, threesies, but they literally were running on the mainstream media about this hurricane drought. And during that time, that 10-year period, there were literally 5 years where no hurricane made landfall. But the minute Trump was elected and canceled the freaking climate cult's gem, the Paris Climate Accord on day one, by the end, by hurricane season, 3 hurricanes hit all the rednecks that voted him into office. I'm crying bullshit. That's just too coincidental, is all I got to say about that.
That is crazy, bro. That is nuts. So basically, right before this climate accord is supposed to go through, we're just getting little baby hurricanes. Most of them aren't even hitting the land.
Yep.
And then as soon as Trump gets us out of this, they just bang us with like just nothing but giant hurricanes.
Well, think about it for a second. Who's behind the IPCC? Climate scientists. Who are the people involved in government level operations like the Department of Homeland Security to control the weather? These same climate scientists. Who's big mad when their CO2 scam legislation gets banned? When he just says, screw it. America's not having that. Climate scientists. I don't think it's a coincidence. And then you follow it up. What happened during the Biden administration? Minimal hurricanes. Once again, until it's election season. Yeah. And magically, they're back, baby.
And their person looks like she's taking a giant L right now.
Oh, right? She certainly is. I mean, while she's out courting freaking Hollywood actors and stuff, and I love my man Dan Bongino. While Biden's out sunning his balls on the beach,
yeah,
everybody's, in North Carolina is going, what the hell am I supposed to do? Meanwhile, I mean, I don't ever talk about politics on my channel because the weather does not give a fuck about your politics. The weather does not care about your religious beliefs. It does not care about any of those things. So to me, making this a political issue is kind of like taboo because in the end of the day, the people who are hurt, it's not gonna it doesn't that weather warfare, that weather activity, it doesn't care about your politics. But the people who are in control just might. So we have to go there. We have to think about the ideology of the people who would be involved in such a thing. When we have something as coincidental, I don't think this requires a tinfoil hat at all. What do you think?
Listen, I don't, but unfortunately, everybody else just, I don't know why. It's like my friend Brian Callen was like, he conceded that we had a show and we debate, and he conceded to me that I was right about everything. And he just goes, where do you get your information from? And it's just, for some reason, some of us are able to get it and some of us aren't.
Well, I
Because
mean, if you're
it's,
not willing to look,
yeah,
right?
right.
Because there's that whole Carl Sagan quote, if you believe the bamboozle long enough, you're captured by it and you're no longer interested in finding out the truth. It is simply too painful to admit to
Such a great
yourself that
quote.
you're wrong. So when you think about it like that, that's what they talk about with cognitive dissonance. That's what Carl Sagan was talking about in that quote. If you're no longer curious and you've got your mind made up and you think you've got it all figured out, then I don't care how much evidence you hit a person with, they're not going to accept it. Whether when I've learned this the hard way doing 15 years talking about chemtrails, you cannot convince certain people that chemtrails are not what they think they are, no matter how much you put in their face. So like they have to have their own little come to Jesus moment where they go, all right, you know what? I saw something the other day. It's really making me question my beliefs. I'm now ready to learn more. And that's really where we have to go with this thing is, are you willing to accept this information? Are you intellectually curious? Because if you are, you can go to weathermodificationhistory.com and spend the next 2 years of your life and you won't learn what what I have. I mean, honestly, if you spend the rest of your life going through that, you're not going to learn what I know already. And you're just going to play catch up, but at least you can get educated enough to have a conversation about this and go, you know what? This is real. This is 100% real. And I can no longer deny it. The evidence is over freaking whelming. And if that doesn't work for you, if you don't trust a guy like me, check the references because the references are almost all from .edus, .govs. I thought liberals loved that shit. I had a friend the other day, and they were dealing with exactly the situation you're talking about, and they're like, no matter what I do, I can't convince this person that weather modification is a thing, that people could even attempt to steer hurricane. And I said, well, how about this one? Here's NOAA.gov, and I sent them a link. This is all of the Weather Modification Reporting Act of 1972 receipts. And you can see for yours, just send them this link and tell them to scroll to the bottom. And they can see who paid for the weather modification, who did it, when, where, and why. And I said, and by the way, let me know how that worked out. And she, it was a couple of days later, she wrote me back. She's like, he's a believer now. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, like certain people are only, the level of proof they need to dig into this sort of stuff is just extraordinarily high. And they have, and especially on the liberal side, they tend to want to have some government source. Whereas on, the Republican side, if it's a government source, they're less likely to believe it. So it's kind of ironic how politics plays into perception and how you have to convince people of things. But yes, I mean, I have had more podcast requests in the, since Helene started than any other time. Hurricanes always set it off. The fear porn propaganda machine pumps into overdrive. And no, I'm not just talking about the mainstream media because there's two different agendas going on simultaneously. You got the mainstream media trying to prop up that CO2 is causing all of these hurricanes to be so
Unbelievable, dude.
freaking, oh, it's all biblical. I thought you people didn't believe in the Bible. But everything's, a biblical flood or, 1,000 year event. And it's all driven by CO2 and global warming, except they don't want to call it global warming anymore. Climate change. And then you have I call them infotainers because they're not activists. The infotainers out there are all drumming this up as it's you know, here's my Alex Jones. The the secret Illuminati. They're out there. They're putting all these chemicals into the hurricane so they can steer them into all the red states because they don't want Kamala to get defeated this election season, and all the chemicals are turning the frogs gay. I mean, hell, I drank the tap water. Now I'm gay. It's just insane what these sick demon possessed people will do. They're controlling all your weather. They're coming to your house, brother. They're going to just turn into macho man for a second there.
Yeah, I love it.
But that's what we're getting fed on a daily basis on Twitterville, on, all of the social medias. And people are, racking up these, hundreds of thousands of views from people who want to believe, but then they're fed this bullshit narrative that's not, it's not copacetic with reality, to the point where you have Marjorie Taylor Greene saying weather manipulation is real. And they're like, bitch, you crazy.
Yeah, I just watching people I love, people who I find to be some of the fastest, funniest, and most intelligent people turn out to be the dumbest ever because they just can't think outside. It's like they're arrogant about their ignorance, and it's unbelievable to me.
I'm proud of my ignorance. Like, I will gladly tell you, that I do not have it all figured out. And there are certain things that we cannot know. So we can dig into the Helene Milton experience. And in my Telegram chat, I am blessed with some of the smartest people on the planet. If anybody wants to join and meet those smartest people on the planet, have all your questions either answered or destroyed, t.me/climate viewer chat. Jeff is a former Navy meteorologist. He's one of my administrators. Stella is another one of my administrators, and they created, and I'm absolutely in love with this idea that I inspired Stella and Jeff to get together to create their own show on YouTube at Stella Q Australia on YouTube. At Stella, Stella, the letter Q, Australia on YouTube. And they have a podcast series they're doing now called Whether or Not. And I love it because it's just the word weather. Is it weather or not? Is it natural weather or not?
I like that.
It's just brilliant. So Jeff, Jeff is the meteorologist. Stella plays the fool, but she is super smart and witty and funny. So she's cracking jokes the entire time. And Jeff's over there with his, dry remarks back going, well, there's these large synoptic, weather patterns and orographic lift and, inversions and hot pressure, high pressure, low pressure domes, and explaining exactly what I like to call it forensic weather analysis. Going back and doing that post-mortem using every single website on the internet, every type of data available, and then being able to say, was it weather or not? Did somebody modify it or not? And when Jeff, I was just on the phone with Jeff for like 30 minutes right before we had this interview. And I was like, hey, man, send me all this stuff because, I'm going to be doing this. And of course, he's going as fast as he can to get it to me. And I'm on Telegram. I'm like, I already found it, bro. Like, I've already found it. I've got it up on the screen. I appreciate you. I'm going to call you afterwards. Love you, Jeff. Not picking on you, brother. Just, if I got a keyboard in my hand, I'm a digital warrior. So I just slice through the internet. So pulling that up in this other screenshot I'm going to share with you in just a few. it's really interesting when you look at it, because we've had these debates and we're on there using all of the different flight trackers. We're using, and then it occurred to me to say, you know what, we should also be checking marinetraffic.com, because not only can you modify a hurricane from airplanes, what about the boats? Because back in 1974, a guy named William Gray came up with this idea, and it was called carbon dust absorption of solar radiation. And the idea was that black carbon absorbs heat from the sun. So if you're going to do that and you're going to try to steer something as massive as a hurricane using ground-based power sources, that's out the window. And I'll show you why. And I'll bring this one up real quick, and I'll share the screen. And this is from 1997. And what we're looking at on the screen is called Test Technology Symposium 97 Weather Modification. This is from March 19th, 1997. And in it, Dr. Arnold A. Barnes Jr. from the United States Air Force Optical Effects Division of the Phillips Laboratory at Hanscom Air Force Base is giving a presentation to a joint Army Air Force meeting called Test Technology Symposium 97. And in it, he has several different things. He goes through the owning the weather in 2025, how the military can weaponize weather. He specifically talks about the United Nations treaty to ban weather warfare, and how the Air Force needs to say, screw that, because 19 years of scientific advances, and we need to be able to meet our enemies. So riddle me this. If Russia and China can steer hurricanes, should we be able to? That's a good question. My wife asked me that.
Great question.
Like, my wife literally was like, and she's literally I'm going to come back to that in a second, but she is my best devil's advocate, because like I've told her like 90% of the stuff I know, and she listens because she's a great wife. And I'm sitting there telling her, I was like, we need to ban weather modification altogether. We need to ban weather warfare, like really ban it, not like that UN treaty, because the United Nations useless. I always think of Dave Chappelle anytime I think of the United Nations, that Black Bush segment. What are you going to do, United Nations? Sanction me. Sanction me with your army. Oh, you don't have an army. I guess you better shut the fuck up. Oh, Lord, that Dave Chappelle skit always gets me. But that's how I feel about the United Nations. Completely worthless.
Yeah,
what can they do? But she made the point that if our enemies, air quotes enemies, because we don't, who knows what's really going on? We're lied to about everything.
I agree with that.
Yeah,
I agree with what you're saying right there.
We really don't know. We don't know if there are enemies or not. But I'm going to use air quote enemies. If they can steer hurricanes, then shouldn't we be able to, or at least understand how to, or at least be able to recognize when they were, in case our enemies were trying to steer hurricanes into us? Because I'm pretty sure they are working on that as well, being able to know if we're sending typhoons into China.
Yeah.
So that's a great, point that she's making. And it's a moral conundrum. I mean, at the very least. But when you look at this paper and you get these guys that are out there saying, well, they're steering the hurricanes with NEXRAD Doppler radars. And this is like, it literally caught on fire. All the people, just spreading this around, they're steering it with Doppler weather radars. And my pushback to them is, well, do you know about carbon black? Like in the graphic I showed you earlier, they're like, no, never heard of it. And then I'm like, oh, well, you haven't heard of it? That's kind of interesting, because Arnold Barnes from the Phillips Lab, when he's talking about weather warfare, he says weather modification using carbon black. So carbon black dust is talked about in Owning the Weather in 2025. It's talked about in 2 Freedom of Information Act requests from 1994, one from the U.S. Navy, one from the U.S. Air Force, all of which are on my timeline. And then this is a PowerPoint presentation, which I pulled directly from dtc.army.mil from the Wayback Machine. So it literally came from the Army's website. I'm not making this stuff up. And what does he say? Here's slide 2. Weather modification using carbon black. Increase cirrus cloud cover. I thought that was called chemtrails. So you mean the military can make chemtrails on demand, and it says deny visual satellite or high altitude reconnaissance to block out satellites in space from spying on us.
Holy shit.
That never crossed my mind, bro. That never even crossed my mind. And I was
Holy
immediately
shit.
brought back to Spacecast 2020, which I retrieved from theblackvault.com. Shout out to the Black Vault. Good people over there. And this was a Freedom of Information Act request where in it, there was a single page that said USSR weather modification. The entire page is blacked out except for one sentence. This showed that the USSR had the ability to create infrared defeating clouds. So even infrared radiation, meaning like, heat vision, even like heat vision, like ground scanning infrared wouldn't be able to see through these clouds that they're creating. So that's what they're talking
That
about
is
here.
so crazy, dude. That is
They're talking about literally being able to roll their latest UFO out onto the tarmac on Area 51 and create clouds overhead and then fly below those clouds, and nobody, not even the satellites in space from our enemies, can see what's going on. Mind blown, dude. Mind freaking blown. Decrease light level for nighttime operations. Now, I didn't bring any of this up for any of these reasons, but I'm just showing just how crazy this gets. This is the reason I brought it up, because then they go on to storm modification.
Oh my God.
And when you get into this is going to be
holy shit.
It's kind of mind-blowing numbers.
It's okay. So if you're listening at home, this is basically a recipe for figuring for what size thunderstorm or hurricane you want.
Right. So they're showing that energy reaching the top of the atmosphere. Everybody, if you've ever looked into this before, 1,340 watts per meter squared. And at the ground level, we're talking 432 watts per meter squared. So to put these numbers into context, they go down and they say hurricane. 7 times 10 to the 14 joules per second, or 200 kilotons of TNT per second. That's how much power is in a hurricane.
Holy shit.
To convert that into watts so that we can talk about NEXRADs or HARP, because those are the two most talked about things I heard during these hurricanes, from, very low information infotainers. 7 times 10 to the 14 joules per second. Joules per second equals watts. So you simple math this out. That is 7 quadrillion watts. That's 7 with 15 zeros behind it.
Holy shit.
So when you realize that a hurricane, 7 quadrillion watts, and an NEXRAD Doppler radar is 750,000 watts. It's actually, that's the peak power on it. The actual power on its average is 1,300 watts, which is less than most people's microwave oven in their house. Riddle me this. How the hell do you think that it's even going to have an effect on something that large? 7 quadrillion watts per second of power is more than every power plant on the planet produces probably in a year. And then finally, I'll just leave it. I'm going to show this last slide. I'm going to take this down, but this is current capabilities as of 1997. Targeted fog dispersal, local changes in rain, cloud modifications for surveillance coverage, hole boring, create, suppress, cirrus/contrails.
Holy fuck, man.
Ionospheric modifications, energy requirements too large for major storms. except except what did they say in this thing? Energy reaching the atmosphere from the sun. The sun is 1.7 times 10 to the 17 joules per second, as opposed to 10 to the 14 joules per second from a hurricane. So this is the true answer. The true answer is the sun is the most powerful thing in the world. Period. Nothing compares. And why they were saying let's dump carbon black into steer a hurricane is because no ground-based radar, no ground-based HARP, none of that stuff could possibly even put a dent in it. And to quote our good friend Joe Rogan's favorite animal, it would be like poking a bear with a toothpick. Bear don't care. Bear gonna eat your ass.
Right.
Your little toothpick, you would need 7 quadrillion toothpicks. And even then, the bear would probably still eat your ass. Let's be realistic. So by focusing the energy of the sun on certain portions of the hurricane to heat it, that's the laws of thermodynamics. With an increase in heat comes an increase in pressure. Hurricanes are low pressure zones. They are.
Oh no, he froze. We were cooking with gas. We got too close. Keep you all day. It's a Saturday. I'm sure you got wonderful stuff to do. So let's get into what is happening. What has happened in North Carolina? What has happened in Florida? What are your thoughts on that?
So, the reason I was showing all that stuff about the DHS Hurricane Modification Workshop, about the military's intent to control the weather, is that in tracking all the flights and looking at ground-based sources like boats and ruling out radars, we have to think about what's the most plausible way, if at all possible, that this hurricane could have been modified, not controlled. You can't control even cloud seeding projects. How could you ever control something as strong as a hurricane? But you can modify it. If a fleet of planes with let's say the U.S. Air Force and the CIA were involved, like they've been every single time in the past, there would be no way to track those flights. They will not show up on any flight tracking software. I don't care what you say. The flights we did track going in and out of those both hurricanes, and I'm loath to call Helene a hurricane because it never was one. That's the other biggest conspiracy around. Is that those were hurricane tracker flights. We didn't see anything out of the ordinary with that sort of thing. We did see one large military plane in the area that really didn't seem to have any business being there. But with Helene, it never was a hurricane. It wasn't even a Category 1 hurricane before it made landfall. And for those who don't believe what I'm saying, I'll refer you to Stella Q Australia channel on YouTube, whether or not Jeff and Stella go through all of the METAR data, which is METAR. This is where they actually look at what were the winds. So what qualifies as a hurricane? 10 meters off the ground, sustained winds of certain amounts. That's how we do the Saffir-Simpson scale of what is a hurricane. The highest gusts recorded were around 82 knots, and the highest sustained wind before making landfall was around 50 something knots. That does not even qualify as a Category 1 hurricane. So the bottom line on Helene was they were all saying it was a Category 4 hurricane. Not just the mainstream media, every meteorologist regurgitated this same lie. And you have to ask yourself why. I think the answer is pretty obvious: because climate change. And even Cat Turd on X, who's like one of the top memers in the world, like, bro, I'm down here in California, down here in Florida. Where's the wind at? Now, I lived through Hurricane Hugo in 1989. I've lived through many hurricanes, and so I live in Sumter, South Carolina. We're not so scared of the hurricane as we are the tornadoes, which I'm going to bring that point up when we get to Milton. Um, but as far as classification of a hurricane, you can go back and definitively look at the what are ground called anemometers. These are ground-based wind sensors from all of the FAA sites, from all of the available data, and nothing jives with what they're saying. So I was on World Tube with Brandon House, and he asked me, he said, well, why would all the meteorologists lie? Are they just lying about this? And I'm like, either they're just regurgitating like all the other CIA Mockingbird media,
Yes.
which is highly likely, or they're idiots. Like, you choose. You put your tinfoil hat on and you decide, because anybody who's gone to weather college or whatever the hell that is, and they got their diploma or whatever in meteorology, or they're just a talking head on TV, they can literally go sit at a computer and look this data up and go, no, like, none of these numbers are saying what they're saying. So I will only refer to it as Tropical Storm Helene, because it never was a freaking hurricane. So the only question left is, was it modified? We can't prove that, bottom line. There's no way to catch somebody doing it. That's the sad part about the state of affairs when it comes to national security and, somebody nefariously going out there to seed a hurricane with carbon black dust, silver iodide, anything. So if somebody did modify either Helene or Milton, we would never be able to prove that in a court of law. So they're just going to call you the conspiracy theorist over there. But based on the history of all this stuff, we can say with pretty good certainty that if they were going to do it, we wouldn't be caught doing it. So the last question on Helene is, well, where did all the rain come from? Why was it so strong? What caused the floods in, Asheville and Spruce Pine and all this? Was it related to lithium and quartz mines? After the fact, you can connect any of the dots. Shit, you can connect all the dots. I have a funny meme about that. And it shows a bunch of dots, and then you start to connect them. It's like intellect, and then insight, and then finally, like, you connect two dots across, that's wisdom. But then you connect all the dots, it turns into a unicorn with wings, and it says conspiracy theory. So when you connect all the dots, that's called apophenia. There's literally a clinical term for people who connect all the dots. And I'm one of those people that are inclined to connect all the dots, but then I have to, like, temper myself and go, okay, let's be realistic about this. So what actually caused the floods in Asheville? Well, number one, in 1916, the exact same thing happened. The exact same thing happened. You can go look it up. The exact same situation happened. What's interesting about the North Carolina floods is that just a couple weeks prior, North Carolina was hit with a 1,000-year flood before Helene showed up. And nobody's talking about it. Literally 22 inches of rain fell in a single day. So when you consider that the ground was already saturated by a 1,000-year flood, then you have a tropical storm, which on the east side of North Carolina, there's a high pressure ridge, a high pressure dome. But on the west side of the Appalachian Mountains was a low pressure area. That's why Helene took that left-hand turn over the Appalachian Mountains. When it did that, the hurricane went up the mountains. This is called orographic lift. So all of that rain, all that water that was, below 6,000 feet was now forced up a mountain. It rapidly cools, condenses, and then falls out as rain. So that's what caused all of those the floods in North Carolina, was Helene crossing the Appalachian Mountains. This can be verified by looking at the CocoRAS. It's a community of rainfall sampling people who submit their rainfall samples. It's an open source rainfall network. And you can see all of the rain totals on the east side of the Appalachians versus the west side, and it confirms everything that I'm saying. And all of this is on the Whether or Not podcast that my friends do. Um, and it's literally says Hurricane Helene. So you can go watch it. It's an hour and 44 minutes. By the time you're done, you'll be a junior meteorologist and you'll be able to debunk this bullshit yourself, because they not only explain it to you and how to get to the data, all of the links used in the video are in the details, so you can bookmark them yourself and learn how to fish as opposed to me giving you fish. So with that being said, then we get to Milton. Milton formed in a really
Can I ask one thing real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, when this happens, all of a sudden the internet is full of everybody who's an expert, and they're talking about weather modification, and they're talking about seeding the air, like you talked about earlier, and forcing it in an unnatural pattern that we've never, that these hurricanes or these storms or whatever you want to call them do. And did you see any of that, where it was going one way and then suddenly it just turns and goes the other way? Did
With
you see it?
Helene?
Yeah, like the hit North Carolina.
Again, when you look at the large weather patterns and you understand the power of a tropical storm, you have to, the biggest factor that's going to influence that is where high pressure and low pressure is. It's going to follow the path of least resistance. So two actual storm fronts, air masses collided to create a massive low pressure area west of the Appalachian Mountains. And that's why it went away from the high pressure, which was on the coast of North Carolina, towards the low pressure. And anybody can verify this using windy.com, Ventusky or Ventusky. I don't care how you spell it. Pronounce it Ventusky.com, zoom.earth. There's so many websites out there. Pick your favorite one and go back and look at it. And you'll see these high pressure, low pressure regions, and you'll see that that's exactly what should occur when you have such a large synoptic system, as they call them, moving between a high pressure and a low pressure region. Now, we also were tracking all the flights. Now, cloud seeding flights, if they were commercial, they would be Cessna planes or they would be private jets. We tracked every single plane that even went near that thing. Nothing is doing the racetrack that you would see with cloud seeding. Trust me, brother, if there was some there forensically, we would have the tail numbers for those planes, and I'd be the one screaming the loudest about it, and they'd be in jail right now. So we watch this with a telescope and a fisheye lens. All right, so we're looking at the macro and the micro all at the same time on each of these events. There were no cloud seeding planes near the tropical storm at all. Everything that happened can be explained by just simply understanding atmospheric science, even a basic understanding of meteorology. And that's not what most people want to hear. They want to hear the scary headline. Now, that does not mean that there was not involved, some kind of secret government involvement. Because again, I'm gonna restate this for the record. If the CIA was involved in making something like this, happen, we would not be able to track any of those flights. They're not going to show up on any commercial flight tracking software. Period. End of story. National security. They don't have to turn their ADS-B transponders on. Therefore, they're not trackable unless you could see them. Oh, wait, you can't see them because there's a bunch of freaking clouds turning overhead and tornadoes everywhere. So they're going to be flying above that if they're seeding. So any way you look at this, there's no way to actually prove it. All we can go on is, what is the history of this? Is it possible? And is it likely?
So your belief is this was a naturally occurring? storm that happened? Which I'm okay with. I mean, like, I'm just trying to ask you what you
I'm in
think.
the 50-50 on the was the rainfall enhanced? I don't think it was even necessary. Based on the amount of water vapor that was in that storm, based on the trajectory it took, you know, I very much trust Jeff. And then I went back and verified everything he said my own way, looking at several other sources like Ramby Slider. He uses it in the video for that matter. The Go 16 East. It takes a picture of the Earth every 10 minutes, using multiple sources. We're not relying on one instrument. You know what I'm saying? I mean, like everything available on the internet simultaneously and comparing where Icon and GFS were completely wrong versus the HRSCC, I think it is. Bentusky had it right, versus, the Icon and GFS models were completely wrong. But even they said it wasn't a tropical, it wasn't a hurricane. So all three agreed that there was no wind high enough to reach hurricane status, not even a category 1. So that's the biggest lie being told. And then beyond that, the path it took, that wicked turn it took over the mountains, all of that can be explained just by understanding how high pressure and low pressure regions work. And
Okay. All
the
right.
flooding, when it crosses over the mountains, think of it just like scraping all the rain out of that tropical storm. That's what orographic lift is, the rapid condensation because of wind rushing up into the air and cooling quickly. That causes it to fall down on that side of the mountain. And then guess what? It just catches. It's like a snowball rolling downhill. The more of that rain builds up as it's making its way back to the ocean, causes that devastating flood with all the debris that comes along with it. That's why there were videos of literally people, getting out of the water and being washed off like it was an oil slick, because when you do that much damage to that much property, think about all the chemicals, gas stations, refining plants, everything that gets mixed into that water as it's flooding out. I mean, it's like the most toxic, filled with, boulders and freaking huge trees. It's absolutely insane how devastating that can, when you really contemplate. I can't even imagine going through a flood like that. And definitely my heart goes out to everybody who's going through this in North Carolina. Um, the you can compare and contrast, North Carolina, Democrat, governor, and the response time there versus Florida and the response time there. Because FEMA and all of those national resources, it's all on the governor. I mean, for those who aren't familiar with how these things work, your governor has to request these things in a timely manner or pre-position things to deal with it very rapidly afterwards. So whereas, we're going 2-3 weeks of people not having any supplies or any help whatsoever, down in Florida, the linemen were getting the power back up within the next day. Like literally as the storm's going off, the coast, there are already linemen out there running power poles and
Holy
putting things
shit.
back together. Despite the fact that with Milton, there was literally 126 freaking tornadoes, which is the second most ever recorded in history in one day. I mean, you have to go all the way back to 2011 in Alabama. There were 134 tornadoes in a single day. So when you think about that, it's pretty mind-blowing. I mean, there's the numbers, bro. You cannot make this stuff up. I mean, let it sink in if you haven't seen it already. That's just mind-blowing numbers. So the vast majority, like I said earlier, when people in the South, we're not scared so much of the sustained winds. Yes, it's a bitch. Yes, it's going to tear stuff up, but it's the tornadoes that spawn off of these sustained winds that do the most damage. So for 120, and by the way, before the hurricane even made landfall, Milton, they had already. I was watching X Live, and there was already 17 tornadoes had touched down in Florida before the hurricane even got there. So we knew it was going to be bad. What's more interesting about Milton is that it formed right off the coast of Mexico. And almost every hurricane in history, I think only four in the recorded history of hurricanes have taken the path that it did. Almost all tropical storms or hurricanes that form, they all start out usually as a tropical depression or storm. When it was a tropical storm on October 5th, it was headed the direction that it should, northwest or west. But on October 5th, it made a turn and then headed back the other direction. This has happened before. Like I said, 3 times before. Very rare. But again, going back to that graphic I showed you, if you can dump carbon black dust into a hurricane, you can change the direction of it. During the very first cloud seeding project on a hurricane, Project Cirrus in October of 1947, they attempted to modify a tropical storm off the coast of Georgia. It was headed out to the Atlantic. And when they seeded it, it changed colors, it changed direction 120 degrees, and then slammed into Savannah, Georgia.
Oh my God.
Doing $3 million in damages, killing somebody, and ended up in lawsuits because General Electric was involved in the experiment. And allegedly, GE was like, you know what, we probably should never do that again. And that's when the government took over these hurricane modification projects. So from General Electric's doing it, with Project Cirrus, there was also Project Scud in between that and Project Storm Fury. Project Storm Fury going for 20 years. Department of Homeland Security 2008 followed up with their Hurricane Aerosol Microphysics program and NASA's Genesis and Rapid Intensification program. You have all of these, experiments to steer, or as they put it now, mitigate hurricanes. We have the 10-year hurricane drought, which just magically came back after Trump was voted into office. 3 major hurricanes hit all the rednecks that voted him into office. You can't make this stuff up.
Yeah, I'm starting to think that right now that this is somewhat could be involved with it, right?
So when you look at the direction it was headed on October 5th, it should have hit Texas. And then I keep going back to that Bill Gates patent to steer it away from the oil fields. That's the way. It doesn't say oil fields, it says interested party. I use oil fields as a great example. Hey, we don't want our oil fields, and they got a lot of money. And they got a lot invested in.
You pay them to have it not hit you. That's crazy.
Right. So that's in Bill Gates' patent. And then what do we see? We see it's headed towards Texas. And then it magically makes a big right-hand turn. And now it's headed through the Gulf of Mexico towards Florida. Once you turn that sumbitch, you don't have to do anything else. It was 86 degrees Fahrenheit worth of hot water in the Gulf of Mexico. It is what intensifies. That is rapid intensification. Because warm, shallow water of the Gulf of Mexico. That's why every hurricane that makes it from the Atlantic into the Gulf of Mexico rapidly intensifies. The only thing that was necessary to make that storm so devastating was to turn the son of a bitch around, because otherwise it just would have been a baby tropical storm going into Texas. Did somebody do that or not? We can't prove that. We can't. I mean, it's just the bottom line. I'm not going to lie to you, but is the technology there? Yes. The possibility there? Yes. Who do you think would do something like that? The government. Why? Because fuck you. I mean, they do not care about you. Have you not figured that out by now?
It's becoming more and more obvious. So North Carolina seems like a natural occurrence. You have this hurricane coming after this storm of a century or 1,000 years, a storm of 1,000 years. So that seems more like natural, you could say. Is that what you're saying? But then the
The
Florida
bottom
seems
line
right.
is like everything makes sense on paper and looking at the atmospheric conditions for why it took the direction it did. And the only unanswered question is this: can you create an artificial high pressure region? Because if you can create artificial high pressure, you remember now when Topher and I were on talking about the Lahaina fires, we were talking about a high pressure region that reached from China all the way to Los Angeles. And I've never in my life seen one that large. Is there some secret technology to create high pressure regions? If there is, that is how this would have been steered the way it was. It's more powerful than anything else. So you go back to how would you possibly do that? Putting my tinfoil hat on again. Well, Hart created something called the artificial ionospheric mirror by creating a plasma fireball up in the ionosphere. And this allowed them to reflect radio waves off of this artificial ionospheric mirror. Interestingly enough,
Oh, shit.
BAE Systems created something called the laser developed atmospheric lens, an atmospheric lens that would use a portion of the ionosphere where they take lasers and they rapidly draw ionizing lines across it to simulate what HARP was doing with the artificial ionospheric mirror. But instead of creating a mirror, they create a magnifying glass. Now, this goes back to Gorodsky, I want to say 1929, who wrote a paper about something called the burning glass, talking about putting a magnifying glass in space to melt the poles, to melt the North Pole, to get rid of the ice. The Nazis tried to create something called the sun gun. Google it. It's on fricka Wikipedia.
Yeah.
So if you were to able to create what BAE Systems is talking about, a magnifying glass in the sky where they could fly a drone up there with a camera on it and then look through this magnifying glass to be able to count how many nose hairs are hanging out of my, schnoz right now, then couldn't they just make a magnifying glass and get out of the way and then focus the energy of the sun on a specific location? And by that matter, couldn't you also seed the stratosphere with carbon black dust, which would absorb that all that heat from this magnifying glass in the sky? And if you did these things, would that create an artificial high pressure region? Because, like, isn't that the first law of thermodynamics? With an increase in heat comes an increase in pressure. So if you were to superheat a region using a magnifying glass made out of our own atmosphere, that's called geophysical warfare. And there would be no way to catch anybody doing this. And you would be able to create an artificial high pressure region, which would steer that hurricane tropical storm the direction that it happened. And the same thing is true with Milton. So when you understand how high pressure and low pressure regions work, the $1 million question, and it happened with Lahaina. So this is really the $1 million question. Can somebody create artificial high pressure regions? If so, that is the mechanism of control. Now, this is not going to be published in some damn peer-reviewed journal. This is not going to be available on the internet. If somebody is doing this, another idea that came up in 1968 was called the solar-powered satellite. It was also talked about by Bernard Eastland, who invented the ARCO patents, which led to the creation of HARP and the artificial ionospheric mirror. He talked about in 2008 at the Weather Modification Conference something called the thunderstorm solar-powered satellite. So again, from space. Do you think that's why Trump created Space Force?
Oh, snaps.
It's really starting to sink in, isn't it? And then he just recently said, when he gets back into office, that he's going to create a Space National Guard to create an Iron Dome for America. Interesting. So when I'm connecting all the dots, I'm putting my apophenia tent covered tinfoil hat on.
Apophenia, yep.
If I'm looking at it through that lens, that atmospheric lens, that magnifying glass in the sky, all of this makes perfect sense. That is where my head is at on this. Is the only question I have left is, can you create artificial high pressure ridges, domes, areas? Because if you can, then controlling all these systems are a very serious reality. Not just, modifying them, but literally being able to pretty much create a wall that will keep that hurricane from going in this direction and head this direction. That's where I really land my plane on this. That is the biggest unknown variable that I have, and nobody's going to know until somebody catches someone doing it. I imagine there might be a way to catch somebody doing this, and we're going to look into, looking at things like total electron content, a whole lot of space weather monitoring next time, to be able to try to catch this in real time, see if there's any atmospheric heating, ionospheric heating in a certain region. Because although HARP was not on, HARP does not have to be involved anymore. That's why the U.S. Air Force sold it to, and the Office of Naval Research sold it to the University of Alaska Fairbanks. They don't need HARP anymore. HARP is rarely ever on. There's only 3 ionospheric heaters on the planet. HARP in Gakon, Alaska, Tromsø in Norway, and Sura in Russia. There was one at the Arecibo Array in Puerto Rico, but it got destroyed when the gantry fell down in the big dome. So now we're down to 3. You don't need any of those to do the thing I'm just talking about, because they don't involve those things. They involve creating atmospheric lenses, which there's literally a YouTube video and an article on climateviewer.com about the BAE laser developed atmospheric lens. If they're willing to brag about it on YouTube with a CGI video about how they're going to be able to make a magnifying glass in the sky with lasers, do you think they're not doing something like this? Do you think our enemies are not doing something like this? And I'll just remind folks who didn't catch the memo. I think it was on Politico or one of those, left-leaning rags, where they were making fun of Trump for saying that China has a hurricane gun. They also made fun of Trump for saying that he would nuke a hurricane. Based on the numbers I showed you earlier, yeah, nuking a hurricane is something that's come up at least 5 times before Trump ever uttered the words, because it would take nuclear bombs to be able to deal with the kind of power involved in a hurricane if you wanted to destroy it. But if you wanted to use it for nefarious intentions, high pressure is the way you would do that. And that would, that would nudge it in the direction you wanted it to go. Alternatively, the chemical method we discussed earlier, that's how you could alter the path of a hurricane. But at that point, hurricane gonna do what hurricane gonna do. It's all downhill like a snowball, from that point on out.
Well, Jim, I'm so thankful that you came here and did this emergency episode with us. I know it's Saturday and you spent some time with us, so thank you so much. And as always, mind blowing. And wow, I never thought the Space Force was not only about satellites, but weather wars. So thank you so much, Jim. One more time, tell them where they could find you.
ClimateViewer.com is my main hub. WeatherModificationHistory.com is the entire history of this. ClimateViewer.org is my 3D map, which has all of these things mapped out, from weather modification projects to the HARP and the ionospheric heaters. All that stuff can be found at connect.climateviewer.com. Ways to support my work, all my social media is my Substack, where I put out my latest newsletter. So if you want to get the latest news and updates, sign up for my Substack. That link is available on connect.climateviewer.com. Love your show, man. Best show on the freaking internet, dude. Every time I come on, everybody's like, man, you got on with Sam, and we freaking love you guys, man.
Thank you, man. That means a lot to me, Jim. You're easily one of my favorite guests to have on. I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much. And guys, check out my special. Why is everybody getting quiet? It drops October 15th on rumble.com, samtripoli.com, and then at the end of the month on YouTube. So check it out and enjoy.